Welcome to this month's Creation Justice webinar, a gathering place for building a faith-rooted and faith-sustained movement addressing some of the most pressing issues facing our world today. I'm Brooks Barrett, the Environmental Justice Minister for the United Church of Christ. I am joined by my esteemed co-host, the Reverend Michael Malcolm, the Executive Director for the People's Justice Council and Alabama Interfaith Power and Light. Michael, as I reflect upon our theme for today, there is a scripture that comes to mind. In Hebrews, we are told that because we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, we are able to run with perseverance the race set before us. We are indeed celebrating a great cloud of witnesses in the coming hour. What are your thoughts in framing our conversation for today?
Yeah, thank you, Brooks, for that start. When we speak of that great cloud of witnesses, we often speak of our past heroes and influences. And as I think about this August panel and our theme for the day, I find myself excited that we have our past leaders who have shaped the path for us, and they've shaped this path for us to run in. And I'm also excited of our present elders who guide us along that path, such as we have today. And today, we need their voices more than ever. We've seen some strides in both the environmental and the climate justice movement. And in those strides, we also seen that we got a whole lot of more strides to make. We've got a lot more that needs to be done. And in that, we need to lean on our elders. And I'm so grateful that we have some of our elders with us today. And I'm grateful to hear their voices as we move forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. We indeed have a who's who of the environmental justice movement today as our featured panelists. Their accomplishments are many, so I can only give the Cliff Notes version of their extensive resumes as leaders in the struggle for justice. I'll now introduce them in the order in which they'll be speaking. First, we'll have Peggy Shepard, who is the co-founder and executive director of We Act for Environmental Justice. She has a long history of organizing and engaging Northern Manhattan residents in community-based planning and campaigns to address environmental protection and environmental health policy, both locally and nationally. She has been named co-chair of the White House Environmental Justice Advisory Council and was the first female chair of the National Environmental Justice Advisory Council to the EPA. Up next, we'll have Cheryl Johnson, who began working alongside her mother, Hazel Johnson, in 1985 to advance environmental justice in Outgalt Gardens, the Chicago Housing Authority development on the south side of Chicago. Since 2001, Cheryl has served as the executive director at People for Community Recovery, which has been at the forefront in advocating for change in Chicago and beyond. Cheryl has served on both the EPA's National Environmental Justice Advisory Council and the Illinois Environmental Justice Commission. We'll next have Vernice Miller-Travis, who is the Executive Vice President for the Metropolitan Group. She was a contributing author to the landmark 1987 report from the UCC's Commission for Racial Justice entitled Toxic Waste and Race in the United States. Since then, she has worked in numerous capacities to build a movement rooted at the intersection of race, environment, economic, social justice, and public health. The Sierra Club has awarded Vernice the Robert Bullard Environmental Justice Award, which brings us to our final speaker for today. Dr. Bullard is the Distinguished Professor of Urban Planning and Environmental Policy and the founding director of the Bullard Center for Environmental and Climate Justice at Texas Southern University. He's often called the father of environmental justice. He is the author of 18 books, including his latest entitled The Wrong Complexion for Protection: How the Government Responds to Disaster Endangers African American Communities. So Peggy, if you could get us started. Welcome, Peggy.
Well, thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to be talking today about Cecil Corbin-Mark, who was the Deputy Director of We Act for Environmental Justice. So to give you just a little sense of him, he was a well-known, respected leader in the environmental justice movement. He passed away on October 15th, 2020, at the age of 51 years old. You know, his family had lived in Harlem for the last 6 decades. It was a community he dedicated his life to, serving again as the deputy director of We Act, which is a membership-based nonprofit, where he joined us first as a volunteer, and then became our first paid staff member in 1994. And, you know, I met Cecil because he lived 2 blocks from my house. And one day I was walking down the street called Convent Avenue, and there was a block party, and he was on the microphone speaking about environmental quality. And I couldn't believe that somebody I didn't know around the corner from me was talking about environmental quality. And so I went up and introduced myself. Got him involved as a volunteer in some things we were doing. And then when we had our lawsuit settlement against New York City for operating a sewage treatment plant as a public and private nuisance, we got a $1.1 million environmental benefits fund for West Harlem. We were able, as We Act, to get a $200,000 grant from that settlement to hire our first staff. And so the first person I thought of was Cecil, and I called him, and he had a very good job doing special projects for the Bronx District Attorney around child trafficking. But I think despite his colleagues and his family telling him, what, you're going to go and work for what? Who's even heard of environmental justice? And you're leaving a good city job? And he said yes. And we set out to start up our little nonprofit business. And the first thing we had to do was figure out how to get a telephone system when we had no credit and, you know, just starting our business. But certainly we went on, and Cecil went on to leave an important legacy, not just in New York, but I think if you talk to some other of the folks here on this call today, they would all have stories that I don't even know about, of things he did. You know, he went to their city and facilitated a meeting, or he went to Brazil and facilitated meetings with the EPA in favelas, or he was at the climate action, the climate talks, again, leading protests and rallies. But he achieved really unprecedented success in advancing city and state policy. And I want to talk a little about that. And of course, it's so sad and disheartening to know that so much work that he did, that he really built the foundation for so much of the policy work that we're enjoying today. It's just so sad that he is not here to see the uptick in visibility for the environmental justice movement, and just to see, you know, right here, I'm in Puerto Rico with the EPA Tic Tac centers, where the, you know, EPA is providing funds in all of the regions to help groups actually apply for grants. But let me talk about Cecil's blend of intelligence, his curiosity, his passion, and his salesmanship, which really made him a natural at developing and advocating for environment and climate justice policies. The work he did at city and state levels was groundbreaking. It was transformative. He helped launch our Dump Dirty Diesel campaign, which urged the Metropolitan Transit Authority to commit to modifying bus depots so that they could accommodate natural gas buses and to invest in clean fuel buses. In fact, the last photo that we took together was celebrating the first electric bus in New York City, which was right in Harlem. And so I want to talk about how he also successfully lobbied the New York City Council to pass a strong lead poisoning standard, our local law 1, the strongest in the country. He helped pass New York State legislation, which banned BPA, chemicals in children's products. That took 5 long years, and he was very, very proud about doing that. He was almost a one-man show, really carrying a strong group called the Just Green Partnership, where he co-chaired a network of about 100 groups statewide working on toxics policies. And so again, very strong in getting chemicals out of kids' products. He also campaigned successfully to pass 2 bills to identify environmental justice areas and concerns and to develop a state environmental justice advisory committee. Again, he played a leading role in the Asthma-Free Homes Coalition and encouraged the New York City Council to pass an Asthma-Free Homes bill that holds private landlords accountable to tenants to remediate indoor health allergen hazards. And again, he helped pass the Period Products Labeling Act in New York State, along with legislation banning PFAS in firefighting foam and equipment. So he was instrumental in developing our federal policy office back in 2012 and helping to shape the Environmental Justice Leadership Forum. And then, of course, coming a lot more contemporary, he was really a driving force behind our building decarbonization and electrification work, which is very, very significant in New York City. And he developed a project called Out of Gas, In with Justice, which is studying the impact of replacing gas stoves, which produce harmful indoor air pollution, with electric induction stoves in public housing. And that has been a very successful research study that showed, of course, cleaner air with the electric induction stoves. And we did this in public housing with Black and Latino low-income residents, and they love the stoves. They don't want their gas stove back. So I would just stop by saying his leadership, his mentoring, so many people come up and tell me that, you know, Cecil was instrumental in helping them do something in their locality. And so right now, we have developed a fellowship program in his name to create the next generation of Cecils. And we are now on our 4th fellow, and we have been able to retain our first 2 on staff. And so again, really creating the Cecil Corbin-Mark Fellowship. Even NYSERDA, the New York State Energy Research and Development Agency, has created a fellowship in Cecil's name. Again, a large state agency, state authority, and I was stunned that they did that, and that's just a wonderful tribute to him. So again, thank you for letting me talk to you about definitely an unsung hero who died and passed way, way too soon.
Thank you so much, Peggy, for that beautiful, heartfelt, and informative tribute. We'll now hear from Cheryl Johnson.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm here to talk about my wonderful mother, Hazel Johnson, who passed away 13 years ago last month on January 12th. So this has been 13 years. So it's been a real interesting for a woman of her age and her character was able to be one of the pioneers in this whole movement. Getting started back in 1979, felt that something in her community wasn't right, just on the smell of pollution alone. Just the air quality in our community was over hundreds of thousands of pounds of pollutants in the air every day. Even though we still in the small, a lot of the air pollution in our areas no longer exists, but it does exist, but it's not at that status. So to speak about my mom, who was born and raised in New Orleans, she come from a family of 5, but at the age of 12, she was all by herself because her parents and sister and brother had passed away. She was able to move to California, then back to New Orleans, then to Chicago. It's been hard, and to see my mother, to walk the walk with my mother day one when she started being concerned about the air quality in her community. She was met with a lot of backlashes. People didn't believe her. People called her crazy. People did things to her and her kids to tell her to stop talking about the air quality or the environmental issues in our community. We was even told by a past person who passed from US EPA, Margaret Williams. She even told us, she said, PCR has been blackballed, so we won't be able to get resources from our EPA back then. And the only reason why I'm saying about it because Margaret Williams passed away. So it has always been a struggle for my mother, but I tell people to really get involved with something you care about in your community that you know is wrong. It's going to take people to be engaged to take something wrong and try to make it right. Even though we know that it's probably a war that we would not win, but we're willing to fight those battles. And we as human beings, and she already said, that we have just as much as rights as anybody else. And what really, the resistance made her fight harder for her community. Because those resistance was really based on ignorance or greed. And when I say ignorance, that's because people don't know. And then when I say greed, it's based on those folks who knew what was going on, but accepted it and benefit from it at the expense of community. And that could be industry, that could be your politicians. Those are the things that didn't bother my mother because she said one thing for sure, either we're going to live in a healthy community or we're going to continue to live in a polluted community. And she said she would die and go to hell before she don't fight for her neighborhood to have a better quality of life, to have the right to breathe clean air, drink clean water, and live in homes that's not contaminated. And it was even more difficult for us and for her is because we live in public housing. And the environmental bias and racism that is associated with people that live in public housing. It still continues today, but it's much subtle than that because you got a lot of people that address in housing related issue. So I say all these things that environmental fighting for your community and doing it under the auspice of the environmental justice is just not one bucket of things. And I learned that from my mom, and that's what she was able to have the capability to do. So when people really look at first and foremost, you must care about your neighborhood. You must care about the fight that you are willing to fight. And there are times where discussions happens, and if you don't know, but you feel that it ain't right, 9 out of 10, she always say it's not right. She said your body will give. She said I don't know why I got involved with this. I don't know why this these reactions is coming my way, but she said I felt and I stand on what I believed in. She believed in her community. She believed that it's wrong to poison a community based on race and class. So only thing I could just say that I'm here because I understand the dynamics and I was able to walk the experience that my mom went through, and she was a fighter. I mean, I guess she was a fighter ever since she was a child because she had type 4 fever, which gave her heart conditions, and all her life she suffered with a heart condition, but she had 7 babies. She was able to do the things that she did in her community. All my life, I knew my mother was very active with youth and the community. All my life, we always had to do something. We always doing something in the community, attending meetings, organizing block campaigns, organizing parades, putting petitions out. So, I still live in the community. I'll be 63 years old next month, but I've been living, and next month, I would have been living in this community for 62 years. Never lived anywhere else. And this is a place that my mother wished to move in. And that's where she moved, and when she got in here, she thought this place was the most beautiful place. And and I'm a reminiscence of it because I see what she's talking about because I was raised through it. So I still live here because if I didn't live here, my voice would not be heard. My voice would be silenced. And that's one thing my mother fought for. She said, you always have to live where you fighting at because you have a voice. So take a passion. If you think something's wrong in your community, and that's what she did. She felt that was wrong. And she wanted to make a change.
Thank you, Cheryl. Hazel Johnson's light is burning bright today, and thank you for sharing that light with us now.
Thank you very much for having this webinar on unsung heroes of the EJ movement. First of all, I'd like to lift up the heroes that I know and I've worked with in the Gulf Coast. I call them heroes of the South and Gulf Coast. And these are 4 people. Patsy Oliver from Texarkana, Texas. Emelda West and Gloria Roberts from Convent, Louisiana, St. James Parish. And Margaret Williams from Pensacola, Florida. And these Black women, strong Black women, have traits that make them extraordinary. And some of those traits that they have in common is that they were all driven by love of community. And they were fearless in their support of family, home, and community. And they all had grit. And this whole tenacity of never give up, never give out, never give in, and fight until the job is done and won. Patsy Oliver was a single mother and worked hard, and she had her American dream realized when she bought a home in the Carver Terrace neighborhood, a community that was built for Black middle class, but never knowing that this subdivision was built on top of a old dump site by coppers, which is a wood treating site, and was contaminated. It was learned in 1984 that it was unsafe, and it took 10 years of fighting and struggling. And Patsy Oliver was one of those leaders from that community, working with allies, environmental justice allies, some environmental groups. I did a study there for the NAACP Legal Defense Fund in terms of the buyouts, discrimination that was being done to community residents in terms of their compensation for their homes. Even though it took 10 years, from 1984 to 1993, for EPA and the Army Corps of Engineers to do the buyout relocation. And it's bittersweet that they were able to get a buyout and relocation, but Patsy never lived to enjoy that victory because on the day of the demolition, she passed away. So you talk about fighting to the very end, and so I lift up Patsy Oliver. Another case of a grandmother, take no prisoner type, fearless. Margaret Williams was a retired school teacher, mild-mannered, but her home was also a Black middle-class homeowners who built on top of a wood treating facility that contaminated the neighborhood. She fought. She was on the National Environmental Justice Advisory Council, NEJAC. I served with her. We were able to work with her under her leadership, was able to get the EPA to perform a buyout of her neighborhood. And this was one of the largest Superfund buyouts of any community in the country. In 1996, she was able to get her community bought out. Again, bittersweet. She loved her community, and buyouts to get people away from harm are good, but you lose community. And so I salute Ms. Williams. She lived to be 88 years old. She passed away in 2011. I salute Ms. Margaret. Another case study of environmental racism involves Ms. Emelda West and Ms. Gloria Roberts. Both of them are grandmothers in tennis shoes, take no prisoner, Marine Corps type, kick-ass environmental justice leaders. And this involved fighting against Shintech, which was a Japanese-owned company that was trying to site a polyvinyl chloride plant, PVC plant in Convent across the street from a school. Ms. West and Ms. Roberts, they're like twins, a dynamic duo. And the idea of why would anybody build a PVC plant across from an elementary school? And these are examples where just respect, disregard. This is 1990. The fight was from 1996 to 1998 under EPA Administrator Carol Browner. So community was able to build out national support, and one of the major organizers to assist in this case was Damu Smith. And Damu, the Deep South Center, Dr. Wright. I was at the time I was at the Environmental Justice Resource Center at Clark Atlanta University. The fact that these two grandmothers fighting hard for family, home, and community were able to gain national mobilization around fighting this plant that would bring so much pollution. And we're talking plastics. I know plastics are big now, but we're talking in the mid-90s that this struggle was going on, and they were able to rally and round up enough support to force Shintech to withdraw their application and not build in Convent. And the old wives' tale or the urban tale going around is that Greenpeace helped Ms. West travel to Tokyo, and she, being a good Christian, she prayed and said and put the cross on the company in Tokyo and said, "In the name of Jesus, you will not locate in Shintech in Convent." And then they said, you know how people stretch the truth. They said she sprinkled something on him. It is in Louisiana, and Shintech did not locate in Convent, Louisiana. These 4 women are warriors. They were built for these fights. They didn't ask for it, but it was thrust upon them. I salute them, and we lift them up. I knew Hazel Johnson for so many years. We traveled all over the world, and I respect her very much. I knew Cecil. Cecil was a dynamo, and we have to lift up these unsung heroes. Thank you very much.
Hey, Dr. B, since you did know Damu, and we don't have Dr. Wright here, and we've got enough time, can you just lift up Brother Damu for us as well?
Of course I can, and I know Vernice can also. Damu was an organizer's organizer. You talk about you look in the dictionary and look up organizer, and they will say see Damu. The fact that he was on based in Washington, D.C., and he fought for justice, whether it was peace and justice, anti-war, civil rights. Damu knew everybody. And when Greenpeace posted him in Louisiana in Cancer Alley, he was organizing those communities, working with the communities and working with the Deep South Center and working with other organizations to really get the focus of environmental racism and toxic pollution and environmental justice. And again, the idea of doing it in a systematic way and having strategy. Damu knew everybody, and he could call in Danny Glover, call in Alex Walker. He could call in all kinds of stars, big names to come and do that tour, that toxic tour. And after we had those meetings and tours and those accountability community hearings, people who would come down and visit, they would change forever. And so Damu was, he traveled, it wasn't just a domestic thing. Damu traveled all over the world. His last struggle and his last justice struggle was in Palestine.
That's right.
In Palestine, and he had to come back home. And again, Damu was fighting so hard, he didn't take care of himself. And a lot of us in the struggle, we fight, but we have to have joy and take care of ourselves. But we lost a warrior, and we lost an organizer. And Damu was a vegetarian, but when he came to Louisiana, he ate fish, and he ate that fish that was cooked by them Southern women who could cook. That's one thing about these Black women that I talked about. They were strong fighters, but they put the Southern in cooking and food, and we loved them for it. I love Damu, and so we lift Damu up. We have awards. Our HBCU Climate Change Consortium has an award, and we named that award the Damu Smith Power of One Award, and we're proud to have that award. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Bullard. You have lifted up some incredible portraits of warriors and heroes for us today. We greatly appreciate that. And we turn now to our final speaker for the hour, Vernice Miller-Travis.
Thank you, Reverend Brooks. Thank you, Bob, for switching with me. Thank you, Cheryl. Thank you, Peggy, for lifting up our friends. Thank you, Reverend Malcolm. I always like to say when I do stuff with United Church of Christ that this is my church that I belong to. This is my church that I come out of. This is my church that set the platform for me and the direction of my life, and the work that I would do. All of that for me flows from the United Church of Christ Commission for Racial Justice. So I'm always thankful and happy whenever they ask me. I always say yes, because there would be no me, there would be no work that I've done, were it not for the grace and the blessing and the intentionality of the United Church of Christ Commission for Racial Justice and the membership of the United Church of Christ. So I always like to start anything I do by saying how much I love my church. And I love my church because I saw it lean into what a social justice ministry means, and to take the donations from our church to do foundational research, to do organizing, to support people all over the country. To me, that is what a faith-based mission is about. And so I just want to give a shout out to my beloved church, the United Church of Christ. Not that I go every Sunday, but you're there for me. So I am tasked with talking about the late, great Dana Alston. And I'm going to try to get through this talk without crying, because I miss her so very much. So Dana was a dear personal friend of mine. And, but we became friends doing work together in the environmental justice movement. And one of my favorite memories of Dana is running into her in the hall after the luncheon, one of the luncheons at the first National People of Color Environmental Leadership Summit. And a group of New Yorkers, of which Peggy and I are the co-founders of We Act for Environmental Justice, and we sat together at a table. We had brought some members with us, some other folks who were from New York. We sat together at this table. The late, great Reverend Dr. Jean Sindab was with us at that table. We ran into Dana in the hallway, coming back from the luncheon before we were going back into the next session. And she was going to give this talk, but I didn't really know that she was going to give this talk. And so she stopped us, and it's like hundreds of people trying to get from lunch into the big meeting room, the big ballroom where the conference was taking place and the big speeches were being given. And she stopped us in our tracks and she said, "I need y'all to pray for me." And we looked at each other and we said, "Pray for you? Pray for you now? Like in the middle of all of this?" And she said, "Yes, I need you to pray for me." So we stopped. Everybody's walking around us, jostling around us. We held hands and we laid hands on her and we prayed for her. But here's the thing. We didn't know why we were praying for her. She didn't say what I needed the prayers for. She just said, "I needed you to pray for me." So we're like, "Okay, girlfriend, that's what you want. You got it." And so then we go back into the session, right? And during the conference, so there's 1,100 people at this conference, and they're in a big ballroom at the Washington Court Hotel in Washington, D.C. And I am in, for most of the conference, in a small anteroom adjacent to the conference. And in that room are the people who are writing and drafting the many versions of the principles of environmental justice that we would ultimately vote on and pass out of that conference. So I'm not sitting in the big room when Dana's giving this talk, but you've seen it. Thank God the UCC has the videotape and has made it available to all of us. And so Dana's doing this speech, and all we can hear in this anteroom is people shouting and screaming. It was like a revival, Reverend Malcolm. And people were falling out. I mean, you could hear chairs turning over. You could hear screaming. You could hear hallelujah. It was really like a full-scale revival. And then come to find out what was happening was Dana was giving this speech. And in the speech, she was reading everybody the Riot Act about all the people in all the environmental movements, in the government, in philanthropy, who had abandoned us in our communities, in our work and struggle for environmental justice. And she called everybody out, and she called them out by name and organizational names. She didn't call individual names, but she called organizational names. She called foundations. She called this one. She called that one. That's why she had asked us to pray for her, because she knew what she was about to do was to pull a lid off the ways that the mainstream environmental movement and environmental grant making and philanthropy and government had wholly abandoned their responsibility to provide equal protection for people of color, for indigenous communities, for low-income communities, for poor folks who were besieged by environmental threats. Dana opened up that Pandora's box, and the door and the box never got closed again after she opened it up. And I tell you that to say what a courageous person she was. Now, from the outside, Dana was a calm, cool, collected New Yorker. She was from Harlem, as I was. But she had lived in DC for many, many, many years. But she was just a chill kind of person. She didn't get excited like me and Bob. She didn't, she wasn't overly expressive. She was actually quite soft-spoken. But she was a very, very, very powerful person, but powerful in those, in those deep ways, right? So, if you if I'm in a space with you or Bob is in a space with you and you start talking foolishness, Bob and I are likely not to let you finish your sentence, or we'll let you finish your sentence, but then we'll tell you what we think, right? Dana was not that kind of person. That was me and Bob, but that was not Dana. She was never the kind of person who would jump on somebody, but she felt it was troubling her soul that we had been struggling the way that Cheryl talked about, that Hazel had struggled to lift up these issues in Chicago and in the Midwest. And that Peggy had talked about how Cecil had to create a path for us to be heard. Dana had seen all of that from all the places that she had sat. She used to work for the American Red Cross doing disaster recovery work. She worked with a coalition, a consortium of Black women in the Deep South, working on justice issues. She worked for the Panos Institute, which is sort of an international development organization. And that's where she was working when she gave this speech at the First National People of Color Environmental Leadership Summit. And then after she left Panos and after the summit, she went on to become the environmental program officer at the Public Welfare Foundation. So Dana was in a lot of different spaces and she had a lot of connections. Oh, she also worked at TransAfrica. She was the first development director for TransAfrica in the United States. So she was a fairly prominent person working at that intersection of development, public health, disaster recovery. And that is what brought her into the environmental justice space. But she was very, very, very low key about what she did and how she did it. But she gave this speech this day and she tore the roof off that summit. And you could tell because of the way people were responding to her. And, you know, you both being ministers, Reverend Malcolm and Brooks, you know that sometimes you speak the word and the people respond. Well, every word Dana spoke in that speech, people were responding to every single thing she said, every pause she took, every sentence she uttered. It was like she was transmitting what was in our deepest souls, what we were feeling, what we were struggling with, what we were living through. She spoke it for us. So we come out of that conference and some of those big green organizations that she had called out, they called up to their funders and they asked their funders to stop funding the Panos Institute and the work that they were doing. They tried to pull the rug out from under Dana. That's how deep her words struck about what she said and her critique of the environmental movement and those who funded it and government and its lack of responsiveness. It cut deep because it was the truth. It was the gospel truth, what she said, and she held nothing back. And so as they were trying to really attack the foundation of the Panos Institute and attack its funding stream, Dana got a job at the Public Welfare Foundation. And she was the environmental program officer. And you talk about sweet retribution. This was really, really, really sweet retribution. And she became the program officer to a number of those same mainstream environmental groups that have been ignoring our plight and not trying to work with us and not trying to align with us. So those were some interesting and fun days watching her navigate that space. But from that space at the Public Welfare Foundation, she began to lift up and to fund the work of environmental justice groups in ways that we had not been funded in the past. She would come to our organizations. I remember when she came up to Harlem and met with us in our office at West Harlem Environmental Action and asked us what we needed. But not only did she ask us what we needed, she had a strategic conversation with us about how we could grow our organization and what were some of the things we needed to do and how we could build ourselves. So she was a different kind of program officer where she was really still doing movement building from the philanthropy seat that she held. But Dana was also an enormously fun person. And so I want to talk about her also as a human being. So in my house, around my house, I think about Dana every single day, every day. Not a day goes by that I don't think about her. Why is that? Because I have this big kente cloth hanging on my wall that she left for me when she died. I have her jewelry box. I have the picture that she gave my late husband and I as a wedding gift. She's all over my house and I can't not think about her. And I think about her every day and I miss her terribly because she used to say to me, I used to come to DC all the time when I was based in New York because I did a lot of public policy advocacy on Capitol Hill. And so whenever I came to DC, I would stay with Dana. And she would say to me, you know, you need to move here. If you leave New York, your dollar will go so much further if you live in DC. And I'm like, that might be true, Dana, but I ain't leaving New York and I'm not leaving Harlem. There's no reason for me to ever leave my beloved Harlem. And so then I was dating this guy who became my husband. And he worked, when we were dating, he lived in California and I lived in New York. And then he transferred, he worked for the federal government. He transferred the headquarters here in DC. And he asked me if I could, he was going to move 3,000 miles. Could I move 250? Bob, fortunately got to know my husband. And I said, without missing a beat, I said, absolutely, I can move to DC. Dana was so mad at me. She was so mad at me for so long because she had been asking me for 20 years to move to DC. And I wasn't studying what Dana was saying. And Travis asked me to move to DC. And I'm like, I could be packed in, you know, in no short order amount of time, right? And she was so hot with me. But fortunately, she and my husband were friends. So I'm switching to another scene. So Bob and Beverly, Peggy, Cecil, a whole bunch of us were invited to this White House event in, I want to say it was 1997, was the fall of 1997. And it was so the White House, this was the Clinton White House, they were starting to have these conversations with different segments of the population about climate. And this was the first conversation they had on climate change and its impact on African Americans and why African Americans should care about it. And Bob, I know you will remember that experience because you remember that a colleague of ours read a poem from Langston Hughes, and I thought your head was going to explode because it was like we didn't understand what climate change was. So Dana was there. Peggy, Cecil, and I had come down from New York on the train. After the White House event was over, we went to B. Smith's at Union Station to have lunch. And as we're having lunch, Dana keeps saying to Peggy, Cecil, and I over and over and over again, I have the worst headache I have ever had. My head is hurting so badly. I don't think I'm going to go back to work. I'm going to go home because that's how bad my head is hurting. So she went home. We got on the train. We went back home. And I get a call in the wee hours of the morning that Dana had a massive cerebral hemorrhage, double cerebral hemorrhage. And it happened that very night after we had been at the White House and after we had lunch that day. And she fought and fought and fought and fought to stay here on this earth. So let me say what I believe triggered that health condition. She also had kidney disease and failing kidneys, but she really, really, really wanted to be a mother. And she had been advised that having children was just not in the cards for her because her kidneys probably could not survive the full-term pregnancy and then the birth. But she didn't want to hear that. And so she did have a child, the beautiful Khalil. And shortly after Dana had Khalil, I'd say Khalil was probably 4 when she had this massive cerebral hemorrhage. And her health really started going downhill progressively after she had the baby. But she was an incredible mother. She loved her son so very, very, very much. You just could see a completely different side of her personality once she became a mother because she was just so, so, so happy and thrilled that one of her greatest things in life to accomplish, to be somebody's mother, had happened. But as a result of that pregnancy and as a result of bringing that baby into the world, her kidney disease really began to advance. And so that night, after we had been together, after we had spent the day at the White House, after we had lunch together, she had this double massive cerebral hemorrhage. So that was the fall, I want to say, of 1997. And Dana waged one of the most courageous battles I have ever seen anybody wage to stay here on this earth. She was in the hospital for months. She came out, she did rehab, she came back home. She did experimental treatment. She did everything the doctors recommended that she did. She was fighting a custody battle while she was fighting for her life. And And she did all of that and she never complained. She never complained. And I'm telling you all of this. Bob said something about we often do this work and we don't take care of ourselves. Dana took care of herself to some extent, but she put more of her heart, her life, her soul into this work of building the environmental justice movement. And even when she kept being told that, there was nothing that folks could do, she kept pursuing this strategy, pursuing this experimental medical treatment, et cetera, et cetera. And she was in California in July and August of 1999 doing some experimental therapy. She had moved all her furniture into our house. Her plan was when she came back from this treatment, she was going to come and stay with us. She had a beautiful home. She had a home on Capitol Hill. She sold that. She bought another home near Catholic University in DC, but she sold the home so that she would have the resources that she needed to wage this unbelievable medical battle that she was waging to try and stay here on this earth and raise her son. So while she was doing that experimental medical treatment in California, she died. She called me earlier that day. I did not call her back right away. I said, when I have a moment to sit down, I'm going to call Dana back so we can really have a chat and I can see what's going on with her. So I'm telling you all that to say this. You never know. You never know when somebody is going to leave here. You never know. Tell them that you love them, the people in your life. Tell them what you need them to do for you. Express and say outwardly what it is that I want. Last thing I'm going to say to you about Dana. So because she had moved all her stuff into our house, I had all her papers and all her books. Yes, I have a really big basement. And Dana's stuff was in boxes all over the basement. But when she left here, when she left from the body, she had not said what she wanted to do with that. So about 9 months after she died, one of her closest friends, Ajwa Ayatero, who was the executive director of the National Conference of Black Lawyers at the time, Ajwa said, Vernice, at some point, we're going to have to go through Dana's stuff. So we put it off long enough. 9 months after she died, maybe a year, Ajwa and I are down in my basement going through all of Dana's stuff. And Ajwa turned to me and said, Vernice, let this be a lesson to you. Tell people what you want to do with your stuff. Tell people where you want your papers to go. Bob Bullard, I'm looking at you. Tell people where you want your belongings to go. Tell people, say it out loud, right? Even if you don't get to the point of making a will, at least tell the people in your life what you want to have done. Because Ajwa and I wound up going through her stuff. We threw some stuff away. We saved some stuff. We threw some stuff away. We saved some stuff. But we don't know whether that stuff was really valuable to Dana and it's something that she would have wanted to retain, or whether or not it could be thrown away. And it was a life lesson to me. I will tell you that my life was forever blessed by having Dana Alston in my life and as a girlfriend, not just a movement partner, but a girlfriend. Last thing, the father of Dana's son, Khalil, who has also since passed away, said to me one day when I was working at the United Nations, supporting the United Nations Conference on Environment and Development. He came and he did international development work. He came into my office one day and he said, you and Dana need to face the facts that the two of you are sisters. And I said, well, if you mean that we're really close. He said, no, I mean, the two of you look so much alike that clearly something is going on here. Y'all are both from Harlem. I think y'all are sisters. And I'm like, yeah, no, Dana knows who her dad is. And I know who my dad is. But he was so serious about the fact that he thought we should claim each other as sisters. And so from that point forward, and that was 1992, our relationship deepened to another level, right? It's that I got you forever, Dana. And she had me forever. And so being here in the DC metro area, I was here for a year and then Dana died. Not even a year, maybe a year. She was at my wedding in a wheelchair. At least she got to be a part of that process with me. She got to know my husband a little bit, but then she was gone. And it's been a big hole in my life not having my girlfriend here that I could hang out with, that I could go to the movies with, that I could go to the Shiloh Baptist Church Christmas Bazaar, which Dana turned me on to. Dana and Damu were very, 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 very good friends. And they had been friends for decades and had done lots of Black nationalist work together. I keep saying last thing. This is the last thing. Dana was very active in support for the African National Congress and for Nelson Mandela. When Nelson Mandela came out of prison and was making that worldwide tour, when he stopped in DC, Dana was one of the hosts for the event that happened here in DC with Nelson Mandela. But she was really active in that world, very, very, very active in that world. And that's where she and Damu really knew each other for. She at Trans Africa, Damu used to be at the Washington Office on Africa working for the late Dr. Gene Sindab, who was the first director of the Washington Office on Africa. We're all interconnected, and all the good people, right, find each other in some way, shape, fashion, or form. And we are blessed in the environmental justice movement that we attracted everybody. The nationalists were there with us, right? The faith-based folks were there with us. The folks who worked on reproductive rights were there with us. The people working on neighborhood revitalization were there with us. The public health scientists were there with us. And oh my God, the social scientists, Bob and Beverly and Bunyan, Brian, and so many other people. We were a huge community of people. And Dana was at the center, and she knew, like Damu, she knew almost everybody. Everybody loved her, and she loved all of us. And the work that we do now, I say we do it in her honor.
Vernice, thank you so much. You have given us some stories to carry forward in our hearts and stories to share. We are grateful for you and for each of our panelists today. Michael, I don't think this could have turned out any better for us. I was really, I wouldn't have it any other way. We came right up to the end of the hour, hearing from our speakers.
I just want to express my sincere gratitude for you all sharing your stories, or the stories of our now ancestors. And I pray that we can continue to be in fellowship and continue to love on one another, so that we can continue to tell those stories and share those stories. Thank you. That's all I can say. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Well, on Valentine's Day, this has been a love fest. We have been full of love for those who have been our sheroes and our heroes and our warriors. And so we thank each of you for lifting up those persons that we can celebrate today.